From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Is Rhode Island's war over pensions finally coming to an end? That's certainly the hope of new state treasurer Seth Magaziner, who inherited the fight when he took over Gina Raimondo's old job. A settlement between the state and public sector labor unions is now being considered by the General Assembly. This week on the first half of Newsmakers, General Treasurer Seth Magaziner. Then, it's been a big week in news, including a verdict in the long-running Aaron Hernandez murder trial and the pitch to secure public funding for a proposed PawSox move to Providence. We dissect the top stories with our Reporters Roundtable on the second half of Newsmakers. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell will join us on the second half of the Reporters Roundtable. Joining us on the panel, as always, is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Treasurer, it's good to have you back on the program.
Thank you for having me, guys.
It's your first official appearance as treasurer.
Yes.
So that's good.
Happy to be here.
Let's dive right into the pension settlement. And before we get into specifics on that, I'm just curious. It's been a couple of weeks since the settlement has been announced. As we said in the open there, it's on its way to the General Assembly to be considered there. Has anything changed since the announcement? Is it on track?
It seems to be on track. Let me just take a step back and say that I think this is a good deal for everyone involved, good for the state, good for the folks who are in the system, who need some certainty about what their retirement is going to look like. So I'm hopeful that the deal will continue to move forward and will go into effect. There are a few remaining hurdles to get over. There's a fairness hearing in court on May 20th. And then, of course, the General Assembly will need to act in order to make this deal go into effect. But we seem to be on track. I'm hopeful that we are, and I'm hopeful that we can get a deal and move forward, because we need to focus on moving our state's economy forward and put this chapter of our state's history behind us.
You've always been bullish about the settlement, and you support it, but if it goes through, the constitutionality of the law would never have been tested here. That's a big question. Does the General Assembly have the right to change pension benefits? Is that a downfall to the settlement, that was never answered?
Well, listen, I believe, and I think the state's position is very clear, that we believe that the General Assembly can never bind future General Assemblies. That's our position. The other side may disagree with that.
But the most important thing is you're not a justice of the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, but listen, the most pressing need that we have as a state right now is the economy, is the fact that we have only gained back barely half of the jobs that we lost in the recession, when most other states have gained back all of the jobs they lost and then some. We need to put this behind us. We need to focus on rebuilding the economy. And listen, this is a good deal. For the state, this deal preserves more than 92% of the savings of the reform. And it's a good deal for people who are in the system, too. The people who are in the system are going to have more frequent cost of living adjustments, higher cost of living adjustments, lower retirement ages in many cases. So there's something here for everyone to like. But listen, if we were not to do the deal, if we were to go back to court, we would have had a multi-year trial. Most likely an appeal, which would have then gone on for years longer. It would have been expensive. It would have done, I think, tremendous financial harm to the state, having that uncertainty. It wouldn't have been fair to the people who are in the system. So, while it might be nice to satisfy people's curiosity about how a court might rule on the constitutional question, this is not a constitutional law seminar. We have to focus on taking action that will help Rhode Islanders now and help the state's economy, because that's what we need the most.
The settlement, of course, doesn't end your involvement in the pension system as treasurer. One of your most important jobs is setting the forecast for how much the pension fund will earn going forward. It can seem arcane to people at home, but it can mean hundreds of millions of dollars in the state budget, depending on what you think. Right now, the retirement board you chair says 7.5% is your assumption every year going forward. What do you think of that number now that you're treasurer? Too high, too low? Do you want to change it?
Yeah, so 7.5% puts us more or less in the middle of what other states and other large public pension funds are assuming. So we're very much in line with the norm nationally. I think that 7.5% is aggressive, but I do think it's achievable. But listen, you never know what the future is going to bring. We hope that there won't be another recession or a prolonged period of economic downturn. We hope that the economy will be very strong for years to come. So we'll constantly monitor it. We'll constantly reevaluate. But right now, my feeling is still that 7.5% number is aggressive, but it's achievable.
Are we hitting that benchmark?
Well, over the long term, I think we can. An important thing for people to remember is that when you say we have a 7.5% target, that doesn't mean that we expect to or have to hit it every single year. It means that we need to hit it on average over a long period of time. So, for the current fiscal year, we had very difficult financial markets in especially the second half of calendar year 2014, which we're now just beginning to see a little bit of a rebound. But, I'd say we most likely will not hit that 7.5% number this year. We could this fiscal year. But over the last 3 years, our average return annually has been over 9%. Over the last 5 years, our average return annually has been over 9%. And I think that the most important thing is what we expect to achieve over the long term in the future. And again, I think that 7.5% number is at the high end of what is possible.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're very clear. You're not at all thinking about raising that to save money in the state budget, get it to 7.75, 8%, close to where it used to be.
Yeah, we have no plans to change that number now.
I want to talk to you about the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. This is your big legislative initiative. And some Rhode Islanders might be listening to that and scared that you want to start a bank. So give us the elevator pitch, if you will. This is your opportunity, right, to explain what it is.
Yeah, so this is not a bank. But listen, I ran for this office because I believe that the Office of Treasurer has the ability to be a driver of economic growth in the state. This is something that I campaigned on, and it's something that I believe in. So what the Infrastructure Bank is going to address is a couple of problems. First, we still have very high unemployment in Rhode Island. We lost 40,000 jobs in the recession. We've gained only about 20,000 of those jobs back. We've especially been hard hit in the building and construction trades, where we lost 8,000 jobs and have gained back fewer than 2,000 of those 8 that we lost. So we need to be investing in putting people back to work in this state, especially in the building and construction trades. So what we propose to do is take an agency that right now is called the Clean Water Finance Agency. This is an agency that has been around for many years, has a very good reputation, and right now it finances stormwater and drinking water and road and bridge projects across the state. We will keep those projects the way they are, and we'll add a couple of new programs specifically focused on energy efficiency, putting people back to work, making our buildings and our state more energy efficient. The last numbers I saw were from January, where we had the second highest commercial electricity price of any state in the country. We were behind only Hawaii. Our commercial electricity cost was 73% higher than the national average. This is crippling for businesses and for our state and our cities. Municipalities alone spend more than $50 million a year in electricity costs every year. That's just electric, not gas. So if we can put people back to work on projects that will make our buildings more energy efficient, you have the jobs benefit, you also have the benefit of savings from reduced energy costs, and you have the environmental benefit of a lower carbon footprint without any new regulation.
What's it going to cost?
Well, that's the great thing, is that we have found a way to do, we think, tens of millions of dollars worth of projects with only $2 million out of the budget. And the way we do that is by involving private capital from banks and private investors, and also we located millions of dollars of federal funding for energy efficiency that was earmarked for Rhode Island that our state has never used. So this is going to be a great investment for Rhode Island because right now, with a $2 million budget allocation, we can leverage that private capital and those federal funds that have just been sitting on the table, and we can do tens of millions of dollars worth of projects that'll put hundreds of people back to work.
Are there any strings attached to this? In other words, can only Rhode Island contractors work on these green energy projects? Because you're pitching this as a big make jobs in Rhode Island kind of a thing.
Yeah, so because we're using federal funds for part of the program, for the public buildings part, public building retrofits, schools and city halls and so on, there are federal labor requirements attached with that to pay a fair wage, which is something that I think is good. The hope and the intent is that the vast majority of this work will be done by Rhode Island labor, because that is an area of our state's economy that's been especially hard hit. We have a lot of skilled tradesmen and craftsmen in this state who have been out of work for years. So, I don't think we're going to need to look out of state for a lot of these jobs because we have the talent, we have the labor force ready to work right now.
I want to ask you a different question about the pension fund. Hedge funds have been a huge controversial issue the last couple of years. Gina Raimondo took a lot of hits on her decision to move money into there. What percentage of the pension fund is in hedge funds right now, and do you want to change that now that you're treasurer?
So right now we're at just below 15%. The largest allocation in the pension fund by far is stocks, regular plain vanilla stocks, which make up more than 50% of the portfolio. My position on hedge funds has been consistent. I think that in an investment portfolio, you need to have diversification. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. If we learned anything from the 38 Studios fiasco, it's that you don't want to put all your dollars in one place. So I think it's appropriate to have a mix, to have stocks, bonds, real estate, infrastructure, and some hedge funds. But I've also been consistent that I think that the fees that a lot of these funds charge are just too high. So we've been working very actively to restructure our agreements with a number of fund managers, and I'm proud to report that we've made some progress. I've only been in office for 3 months, but so far we've successfully lowered fees at 2 of our hedge funds, 1 of our private equity funds, our manager of the Ocean State Investment Pool, which manages cash for municipalities, and also several of the mutual funds in the college-bound fund. So we've had a fair amount of early success in negotiating lower fees.
Are you happy with their performance?
Some of them yes, and some of them no. We also, after I took office, dropped one of our hedge funds that was a low performer that I didn't have faith in. And I should say that this work is ongoing. In the coming months, I think you can expect to see more progress both on the fee side and on increasing the quality of the fund managers that we have relationships with.
Late last month, the state retirement system retroactively denied the pension of former Coventry District Fire Chief Paul Labadia, saying upon further review he did not earn enough years as a firefighter while in North Province. How unusual is that type of action?
It's unusual, but not unheard of. Let me just start by saying that I have a zero tolerance policy for corruption in my office and in the pension system overall. This is an unusual situation in that here we have an individual who his employer, the town of North Providence, originally told us that he had worked enough years to qualify for a pension that would be paid for by the town of North Providence. This is not state money we're talking about. It's the municipal system, but we manage it. And then the town came back to us later and said, no, actually, it turns out we don't believe that he has enough years to qualify. So the pension is suspended. We have not paid this individual a cent since I took office. If it does turn out that he is guilty of criminal activity, which is another aspect of this case, then the pension would be suspended permanently. But when it comes to these municipal employees, we have to rely on the records that are kept by the municipalities. So it's unusual in the sense that it doesn't happen often that a municipality will come to us and say, well, we made a mistake or we changed our mind, but that's the case here, and so we're going by that. And
you say criminal activity. Our understanding at last check is the Rhode Island State Police was looking into this. Accurate?
Yeah, that's right. And our policy in the office is that if someone, a public employee, is convicted of criminal activity in the course of their job, that we will then take action to revoke the pension. So if that turns out to be the case here, we'll be ready to do that. But there hasn't been a court ruling on that yet.
You campaigned on a blueprint, a policy document you released last year. You campaigned on it. Bill Clinton talked about it. I went to find it yesterday on your website, and it's gone. Why did you take it down?
Well, where you can find it is in the work that we're doing. I can remind you some of the things that I talked about in the blueprint. I talked about
I'd rather just read it again, maybe, to check.
We can get it to you. But look, we talked about launching a state infrastructure bank. We're working to do that. We talked about launching a school building authority, and we're working with the governor and the General Assembly to do that. We talked about about reducing fees in the pension system. We're working to do that. So, the blueprint is what I ran on. It's what I want to do as treasurer, and we are, I think, making good early progress toward achieving those goals.
But you did decide to take it off the site?
I haven't looked at the campaign site in several months since I took office. So we can take a look at that.
We are running out of time, but I do want to have you weigh in on this. The PawSox, they're looking for $150 million in public money over 30 years in an effort to move their ballpark to Providence. What do you think? Do you like it or not?
Like all Rhode Islanders, I love the PawSox and I want them to stay in Rhode Island. $120 million is a lot of money, and you could do a lot of things with $120 million. So I think that we need to look at this deal very carefully. This is something that the governor's office, the Commerce Secretary, the General Assembly, the Mayor of Providence is going to need to do some real serious diligence on. Our office stands ready to assist them if we can be of use. But this is high stakes and a large amount of money that's being proposed, so we have to be very cautious.
All right, we're going to take a break, and you heard the treasurer there say 120 million. I said 150 million. We're actually both right, and we'll explain some of that on the second half of the reporters' roundtable. We're going to bring in Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell, too. It was a big week in news, including Aaron Hernandez, the verdict in that trial. So stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.
Let's go.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and we are joined this week by Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell. She covered the Aaron Hernandez trial gavel to gavel. Great job.
Great job.
I know it's a marathon covering those trials, and you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, after several days of deliberation by the jury, I thought things, for me, were starting to look pretty good for the defense. And that's evidence aside. It was just like the indication that if they thought he was guilty, then they would have come back and said he's guilty. And then day after day after day, when the verdict was read, guilty of murder won, were you surprised?
A little bit, but then you have to take the step back and realize that there were technically 7 days of deliberations, but a couple of those days were half days. They had 439 exhibits to go through, and those are exhibits that aren't just 439, right? Some of those are exhibits that have parts A through Z.
Right.
So they are pouring through thousands of things in that jury room. So when you really take a step back and look at all of the surveillance video they had to watch all over again, all the photos they had to go through, it makes sense that they took plenty of time. They were very deliberate in their deliberations. And they all said afterward that they felt like they gave it the appropriate amount of time. Same thing, prosecutor said he also felt it was the appropriate amount of time for all of the evidence and all of the testimony that they heard.
So let's talk about that moment. When everyone was watching it at home or watching it online, you could hear some noise when the verdict was read, guilty, murder won, and there was some reaction. But take us in the courtroom. You were in there. What was that moment like?
So I was sitting right behind Cheyenne Jenkins and Terry Hernandez, Aaron Hernandez's mother, and immediately my attention was drawn to them. I wanted to originally look right at Aaron Hernandez, but they both burst into sobs. So my eyes darted right over to them, and they kind of fell into each other's arms and were consoling each other. Then I looked right back over at Aaron Hernandez. He seemed pretty stone-faced, which was kind of surprising, but immediately he was sat down.
Now, people have talked about him being sat down. It is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the guards seat him because you are no longer presumed innocent.
Correct.
Once that guilty verdict is read, sit down, handcuffs go on.
Absolutely,
right?
And that's exactly what happened. It was a very business moment. He looked like he kind of wanted to stay standing, but he was very respectful of them telling him to sit down.
I don't think he had a choice. I'm just going to throw that out there.
There was no choice. And then I looked over Odin Lloyd's mother weeping, but you could kind of see this little faint smile. You could just see that wave of relief wash off of her, and you could just tell that this was an intense moment for everybody in that courtroom. And then Aaron Hernandez starts trying to make his eyes at his fiance and mother, trying to say it's okay.
Stay strong.
And Ursula Ward,
moment.
Odin Lloyd's mother, made that dramatic victim impact statement where she forgave him and anyone else involved in the killings. I mean, what was the reaction in the courtroom to that?
It was a powerful moment. It was powerful. I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom because it was so silent. But I was watching Aaron Hernandez as she was giving that statement, and he, kind of similar to his demeanor throughout this whole thing, has been pretty stone-faced. He didn't register a reaction when this woman was saying, "I forgive you."
And that was another question I had for you. You know, we knew Aaron Hernandez as a football player. We watched the quick clips of him on the nightly news throughout the trial. What was he like in the courtroom day to day? I mean, was he paying attention? Sometimes he looked almost, I'll say it, a little smug in the pictures we'd see on the evening newscasts in your reports. I mean, what was he like day to day?
He was paying attention. He was really engaged in this whole process of his trial. He was often taking notes, whispering to his attorneys. It seems like he was always sitting up straight, always trying to be respectful of the process. But then when the jury walked out of the room, that's when we saw kind of maybe the real Aaron Hernandez with the big smiles, a lot of laughs, the more casual, relaxed Aaron
each
Hernandez.
Day, you mean, when the jury would leave, he'd change a bit.
Yeah.
So he was taking notes. Any idea what he was? I mean, that's sort of.
Oh my goodness! I wish I knew what those notes said. No idea what those notes said. But it was throughout different testimony. It wasn't just one kind of particular witness. It wasn't just during police officers' testimony or during his fiance's testimony. It was throughout the entire trial. He was just engaged in the process.
This is a reporter's roundtable, so I want to get the reporter's perspective here about how you managed things. There's this pressure now for everyone, for every reporter to constantly tweet and provide live updates on a big story. But for you, you also have to balance that with, okay, I got to file a story online, and I have a noon live shot, I have a 5, and I have a 6 o'clock live shot. How did you manage that?
A lot of copy and paste. So with Twitter, it was kind of this new fun way to cover a trial, right? Because you're able to take notes in these brief little snippets, and that helped me go back and write my stories
later. Use it as your notepad.
Absolutely. Right. So I had my log of notes every day, and then I also had my tweets every day that I could go back and look at. So by the time the 5 and 6 o'clock shows rolled around, I was very prepared, very confident that I knew all of the bullet points I needed to hit.
All right. What was it like covering? I'm curious. I mean, we're all out on assignment. Usually, it's just Rhode Island reporters out and about. You had a lot. You had some national reporters and everything. I mean, how big was the media pack you were with day to day at Aaron Hernandez?
It was big. I mean, there were CNN, ESPN, Fox Sports. It was big. People were in from all over the country, and it was 20 media passes every single day. So if you weren't one of the first 20 in line, you had to go into a media overflow room.
Every day you had to get there first if you wanted to be inside?
Yes.
So you got up early every day?
Got up early every day. But I also had a lot of help from the morning crew. They would wait in line for me if it was getting toward the end.
No cutting.
It was just a media pass for each organization. It was allowed. But it was huge interest. And then as the deliberations went on, more interest. I mean, we were sitting outside listening to the press conference after everything was done, the verdict had been rendered, and there was a mic flag from Inside Edition and all of these other organizations that we hadn't
It's
seen
amazing
throughout
how
the
quickly
trial.
they can get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of swooped in. It was amazing.
All right, I want to pivot to my right. We have a few minutes left, Ted, and you covered the PawSox proposal. They kind of unveiled what they wanted, what they need, what they want in moving the stadium to Providence. So break it down for us. So,
I went to this, Jim Skeffington, the lawyer for the PawSox, the club president, made his pitch, and they want a couple of different things. The big headline, what we just heard referenced by Treasurer Magaziner, they want the state to sign a 30-year lease on the stadium. So they would build the stadium for about $85 million, they being the owners of the PawSox, but then the state would in advance agree to lease it from them for $150 million. Then the PawSox would pay the state $30 million to lease their own stadium back to play in. Right. The net result, the state hands over $120 million to the PawSox organization over 30 years. In addition to that, they want the land, which is the 195 land, which is state-controlled right now. They want to build the stadium there. They want that leased to them basically for free, maybe at like $1 a year for 30 years. And they want Brown University, which owns the other piece of land there they need, to knock down buildings they have on it and lease them that for free. And they want the city to waive taxes for 30 years, and they want a zoning change.
So just a couple things.
Just a few minor things to get the stadium.
So I remember when you came back from that press conference, you told me that there was a question that was left unanswered. What was it?
The question I asked Jim Skeffington that he wouldn't answer that I really would like to know is, when will the new owners break even on the deal?
Why
with
is that
this?
important?
Well, because the big question everyone has, especially after 38 Studios, is how much is public money being used to help private people make a profit? And there's no doubt on that. This is not, PawSox is a for-profit. There's no doubt, or I'm not sure how they're structured, I should say, but they'll take in money eventually. They're not looking to lose money on this deal.
It's not philanthropy.
It's
You
not
can say
philanthropy,
that, yeah.
right? And so, if the state's going to shovel $120 million to them, give them valuable free land, yes, they're putting $85 million up front to do the stadium, to get it built, but at what point will they actually start to make money, and how much will the state be the reason they make money and they make more money? They won't answer that.
We have a minute. I don't want you to opine on this, but I mean, as taxpayers, if they're asking for money, shouldn't we know how that is structured?
Well, that's the. I mean, I have to say I did learn lessons from covering 38 Studios that come in my head here, and one of them is we never saw 38 Studios books. And of course, the argument's always we're a private firm, we're a private organization, we don't need to open our books. But as we've also learned, when there's that much public money on the line, people are going to be very interested in what's in those books and what the repercussions are for the taxpayers. There's no sign any of those questions will actually get answers. Their position is clear. The PawSox are private and they don't have to answer it. But I wonder if there's a lot of resistance to this ask, if they'll need to provide more information to convince everyone there's a reason that this deal isn't too sweet for their side.
If you want to learn more about this, Ted Nesi has a great breakdown online. You can go to WPRI.com. I thank Susan Campbell for joining us on the Reporters Roundtable. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. If you missed it, that's also online, WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.